Okay, there's just a few more joining, but I will make a start. So good evening, everybody. My name is Anna Grealish and I am the Women in Sport lead for Athletics Ireland. I know I've met some of you before, but I know many of you maybe are new to me, so it's great to see you. Welcome this evening. Thank you for giving up your Friday evenings to talk about a really important subject and something that I know is very close to both myself and Ellie, who's going to be speaking tonight. So this is part of a wider campaign to, I suppose, promote periods in clubs, to support coaches, to support our athletes around periods. So the campaign is called Let's Talk Periods. We've had a couple of these webinars. The first one we had was for men only, to make sure that they're comfortable having that conversation. And then tonight was open to everybody to attend. So it's part of a wider campaign as well that I'm running over the next few months. We're going to be running a separate one on REDS, so relative energy deficiency syndrome. And then after Christmas, we're running a campaign around the menopause as well. So we're really looking at female health. But this one around being period supportive, I think is a huge topic. And one that we hope the clubs and coaches are going to get behind over the next few months to really support their club around that. So I'm delighted to have Ellie Loftus joining us this evening. Ellie is a Galway City Harrier. She's based in Galway, and she is going to be giving us the presentation this evening. If there are any questions for Ellie, if you want to pop them in the chat, either as we're going through or at the end, or you can unmute yourself at the end of the talk and there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Ellie, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Ellie.
You see that okay?
Yep, that's just come up there now.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Anna, for having me here. It's great that Athletics Ireland is doing something so important like talking about periods. It is a subject or an area where we lose an awful lot of girls, as you know, to sport around the puberty and around periods, especially if there's challenges in relation to periods. So this is a very important topic. And as we know, periods is part of the menstrual cycle. And the menstrual cycle is obviously a lot more complex than just the periods, but we tend to kind of think in terms of the challenges that periods present when we're trying to get on top of it or in front of it or talk about it.
Sorry, Ellie, just unmute yourself there.
Yeah, I don't know how did I get.
Sorry, no, perfect. Sorry, thanks.
Did you hear any of that at all?
Yeah, just that last sentence.
Okay, perfect. I know what happened there. So just how important this subject is, periods being part of the menstrual cycle, and that how complex it is and how we need to kind of be on top of this in relation to how we speak to our athletes, how we set up the physical and the emotional environment to make them feel comfortable for us to be able to talk to them and them to be able to talk to us about periods. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Ellie Loftus. I'm a mother of 2 girls. I grew up in a household of 4 brothers. I had no sisters. I grew up in a time when it wasn't, something they could really talk about to anybody. Mums may or may not have mentioned at the time. There was very little mentioned in schools. And so I suppose, know, and as many will hear on this call, will know that how important it is to be able to be comfortable. And we want to make sure that that's different for our girls of the present and of the future. So I'm a general nurse by background. I postgraduates in pediatrics and in intensive care. I have a Master of Science from UCD in health. I'm qualified in child and adolescent health screening for Trinity College Dublin. I'm a barrister in my spare time, and I use kind of that advocacy role, especially for our girls that have maybe intellectual and physical disabilities that are very much forgotten in the period conversation. And I'll touch on that in a little while. And then I'm a founder of a very small Irish business that I set up on the back really of seeing how things really hadn't changed in relation to periods in the last 50 years. And the challenges have been very much the same in terms of how we manage periods. So I started designing period underwear, which was a new concept to Ireland. I started designing period sports shorts and period swimwear to try and encourage girls to stay in sport, to be able to manage periods in different ways. So why are we here? I kind of use this slide to set the scene about how girls feel about their periods. And this is a study from a couple of years ago. It's a Plan International study who tend to do an awful lot of work with girls internationally, but this was in our own Irish context. And out of 1,100 Irish girls that they surveyed between the ages of 12 and 19, they asked them about period stigma, basically how they felt about their periods. And 55% of those girls said that they were embarrassed by their period. Now, we really have to look at that statistic and go, you know, we aren't doing a great job. We've come a long way, but if 55% of our girls are still saying they're embarrassed by their period, then we have quite a long way to go. And part of that is sitting here tonight and coming together as coaches and as parents and seeing how we could make that statistic different, how we can make things better. 61% have said they've missed school. 1 in 5 girls drop out of sport. We know that only too well between primary and secondary school. And I'd say anecdotally, that might be a bit higher than that. We certainly know that we lose them when their bodies start to change in puberty, when they become kind of awkward within their own bodies. That's how they feel and that's how they describe it. And obviously when they start to get their periods, and particularly if periods are kind of difficult to manage, either through period pain or that they have heavy periods. And 8% felt less able to pay attention during this time. And we know that this, like if you look at those statistics alone and you think about the girls that you coach coming down to training practice and they have their period or they're going up to Athlone or to Abbottstown or to Tullamore or whatever, and they have their period, how that might impact even on the training or impact on their performance or within competition. So we drilled this down a little bit further. So we carried out some focus groups with some girls and their mums. And it was a day in the life of a teen and how they described their period or how they felt about their period. And one described it being so painful. So we'll touch on this in a little while, how you might manage period pain or how you could talk to one of your athletes in relation to if they're having particularly bad pain and it's affecting maybe their training or it's affecting their performance in general, especially when you have your high performance athletes, say, for example. I would like to feel normal on my period. And I guess the opposite of that is that this girl is actually not feeling normal on her period, but she's feeling normal every other time. So why is that? I don't want to play sport on my period. I am too afraid of leaks coming through my clothes. And this was a very strong theme that came through, was that concern about period leaks. I am scared when I stand up at school and feel that the gush of blood, I'm so afraid that's going to come through my clothes and everybody will see. And again, that's the period leaks and the concerns and the worries about that. So you can imagine your athlete about to do their high jump or go on the cross country run or throw the shot or whatever else. And instead of concentrating on what's ahead of them, they're worrying about something like a period leak. I know it isn't a big deal, but I just don't want people knowing I have my period. To me, it is private. And I'll talk about this in a little while again about, you know, that it's okay to be private about this. As much as we're trying to make girls comfortable about it and that we're comfortable on the topics ourselves, it is a private matter for a lot of girls and they don't want to be going out declaring that they have their period. So we'll talk about handling that in a little while. And as a mom, it is your job to protect your child, and protecting them in this most vulnerable time in their life is so important to me. So this mom is actually describing the most vulnerable time in her child's life to date is actually when she gets her period. So you look at this as kind of the impact that periods are having on the day in the life of a girl. So you all know, a lot of you are female that's on this call or on this webinar. So we know what a period is. But what's important, I suppose, to take away from this is we know that a period is just maybe the 5 to 7 days of the cycle. It's not the menstrual cycle in itself, it's part of it. We know that the menstrual cycle is a lot more complex than just the period or the 5 days of bleeding. It's a sign of health. And that's really, really important. It really is the kite mark. If a girl is getting regular and normal periods, it is a great sign of health. It's a normal bodily function. And as we know, as females here, none of us would actually be here without periods or without the menstrual cycle, and humans would cease to exist. So it affects 50 to 51% of our population for 30 to 40 years of our life. It is one of the most normal, natural bodily functions in the world. And that's how we will change things going forward, by normalizing it and normalizing the conversation around it. So what is it? Well, we know as females it's the shedding basically of the functional layer of our uterine wall. What has happened is we've had ovulation. The egg has come out of the ovary into the fallopian tube. It hasn't been fertilized. and therefore the uterus sheds its lining because it's no longer required. It occurs every 28 days approximately, but it can range from 21 to 48 days. And the mean interval cycle, if you break that down, is about 32.2 days. But a lot of us are very familiar with the 28-day cycle, but just, I suppose, the take-home message is not 28 days for everybody. Most menstrual periods last 3 to 7 days, but if a period lasts for 10 days or longer, we wouldn't consider that to be normal. So going back a step further, so we're talking about, you know, the menstrual cycle, and we call that menarche, menstruation, periods, or whatever. But we have actually, when we're coaching our younger girls, just a bit aware around the signs of puberty, because there's an awful lot going on in the female body around that time. And I guess we kind of need to take that into consideration when we're training our girls or making training plans. So the breast budding typically occurs after the age of 8 years of age. Then that's followed by the pubic hair development. You can probably see it under the arms as well. They get a growth spurt, and what's very important here is that girls will only grow for 2 years after the onset of their period. You know how boys will grow until they're 18, but girls will only grow for 2 years. So we need to be very realistic about, you know, how we've athletes and they go into puberty at different stages, and, you know, some of them will be very well developed, and you know, you'll even see the body is probably better developed, and maybe the musculature of the body is a bit better developed. They're a bit taller, they're going over the hurdles much easier. But we need to kind of be realistic that, like, not everybody's going to go through puberty at the same time. So we need to be kind of conscious of that, and that we're not comparing girls to boys, because they're not going to grow for the same length. So once their period is started, they grow for about the 2 years after. Their growth is finished at that point, unlike boys. And finally, then we see the onset of a period, typically 2 to 3 years after the breast budding. And that's what we kind of expect to happen. And that would be the general norm. So just going back then to the first period, so what's normal? So we typically expect it to come between the ages of 10 and 16. Now, we are seeing periods come earlier than that. We're seeing them as young as 8. We don't kind of expect that to happen, but if it does, we would be saying, look, if we're in that situation as a parent, or, you know, you're in a coach and you might be in maybe a poor socioeconomic kind of area or whatever else. So we, you know, if a girl is getting a period at 8, we would be saying to go to see the GP, because they can get this thing called precocious puberty. And they do need to be checked out if they get a period before the ages of 10, and then around and about the range of 10 to 16. What's interesting, in the 1840s, they got the period around 7, but by the year 2000, it has been, you know, it's in and around 12, and it hasn't really changed a lot. Although, as I said, we're starting to see girls get the period much younger, and even if you look at the classrooms, there mightn't even be sanitary bins at that stage. So just being on alert as a coach that girls can get the period as young as that. The average age is 12.4. It tends to be painless initially, but it occurs without any warning. So you can be away on your away trip. You can be up in Athlone, you can be up in Abbottstown, Tullamore, you know, your local regional, or your Connachts or your Leinsters or your Munsters or your Ulsters or whatever, and it can happen. So it's about being prepared. It's about having had that conversation before this kind of occurs, having your period kits in your clubs, having a period kit with you on the trips, just being prepared for it, that no matter what happens, so no matter what eventuality, if a child comes up to you and says, and that's what they are, a child, they come up to you and they say they're after getting a period, or they're bleeding, they mightn't even know. Sometimes the conversation mightn't have happened at home, they mightn't know what's happened to them, and that you will have to deal with that as a coach. So the first cycles, when they get their period, are varied in length and flows, and sometimes very unpredictable, and they can come at different stages, and they might be shorter or longer. So what to expect? So by the age of 15, 98% of females will have undergone their first period, and that's signaling then the maturation of the adolescent female body. But I'm going to re-emphasize that the female body, not emotionally. They're still the same 12-year-old girl that was with you yesterday and last week or whatever else, still the same emotional needs, the same emotional development is going to need to be there. They're still very much a child. And we know that in law, a child is a child if they reach the age of 18 under the Child Care Act 1991. And there's a very good reason for that. So frequently the periods are irregular. They range from 20 days to 45 days. And by the 3rd year, after the period has started, 60 to 70% of girls will have a cycle around 21 to 34 days. And that is very typical of the adult female body, or the adult female cycle. So then just going on, so that was kind of what we expect to be normal, but sometimes we look at what's normal first before we can look at what's abnormal. And this is where we come in as coaches, because we don't want to contribute to anything that might slow down a girl reaching or going through puberty and getting her first period, or indeed when she's got her first period, causing it to stop by, let's say, for example, overtraining. And I know that Anna's setting up the REDS talk for you, especially in, I guess, in long distance running. But we have, you know, the difficulty or the challenges is that, you know, there's so many more sports open to teenagers now and to girls, like camogie and football and soccer and basketball and all the other sports. And it mightn't be necessarily that you're overtraining your athlete, but it's because of all the other sports that they're doing, and you know that's building up in training hours during the week. So amenorrhea is when girls don't get their period at all, this absence of a normal period. And the two different types that we would be kind of concerned about is amenorrhea is the complete absence of a period by 15 years of age, where you're seeing them, they haven't had their normal growth, they're growing normally, they've had their growth spurt, and that they have the development of secondary sexual development, where they have the breast budding or the breast development, they have the underarm hair, and they have the pubic hair. Or they might have an absence of a period altogether by age 13, and we don't have the normal growth that we would expect, the growth spurt, and they don't have the breast budding or any breast development, for example. And then secondary amenorrhea, the absence of a period for greater than 3 cycles intervals or 6 consecutive months in a previous menstruating female. So your athlete has been having normal periods and then suddenly they stop. And that's called, as I say here, secondary amenorrhea. And that's where you might see, you know, obviously that might be the REDS, and you might have an athlete that, if that happens, you know, is it that they're overtraining? So what isn't normal either is, and like a lot of the time, we're the people as coaches that's, you know, in contact with the girls. You know, sometimes you know, obviously might add up to a few days in the week or whatever. So we need to kind of be on alert as well for things like this. So, and they may come to you on a away trip. You don't know when you could be presented with this, and it's just being prepared and having this knowledge base for that. But it is abnormal for a girl to get a period or vaginal bleeding prior to the onset of her first period. We don't expect to see that, and we certainly don't expect to see it to come before the secondary sexual development, like the breast budding. We wouldn't expect to see a period before that. So we would be concerned about genital trauma, tumors, bleeding disorders, and sexual abuse. And obviously we do the referrals to the proper channels if we suspected or were fearful of any of those. And periods is also considered delayed, or the onset of the first period is considered delayed if more than 3 years lapses between the onset of the breast budding and the first period. So there is time frames where we expect a first period to come. And then specific concerns, I touched on this a little bit earlier, you know, where menarche is too early before the age, or periods is too early before the ages of 10, or it comes too late at or later than 15 years of age, and they would need to see their GP if either of those happen. And we do know that there's future adverse physical and psychological, you know, outcomes that can be, you know, poorer in relation to where periods come too early or too late. So a late period again, and this is specific to us as coaches. So we do see that the first period generally occurs later in athletes than the general population, than what we'd see across the board, where there's intense exercise for longer than, say, 2 hours per day. And that can delay puberty, and it can delay the first period as well. So that's things that we need to be careful of. And again, in context that your athlete is doing other sports. It's estimated that the minimum body fat, and you'll be covering this in the REDS anyway, that minimum body fat of 17% is necessary for the first period to come, and 22% body fat for a girl to maintain and keep having a period. So moving on then to the challenges that you might see as a coach, why girls might drop out of sport or athletics in the first place, why they might not show up to training on certain weeks, why they might not maybe perform as well, why they might be able to train like they were able to train last week. So period pain being one of those, and really is the bane of some girls' lives. And, you know, can be very, very debilitating for some, incredibly debilitating, like them losing days of their life every month. And it really doesn't have to be that way, because we do need to send them to their GPs because there's different interventions. And I will talk about that in a second. So we don't really know why some girls suffer very badly from period pain and some don't. Like I was saying to the guys last night that like I never had a period pain until I left home for the very first time. And I was in college for the, and we were getting some lectures and I was like, oh God, what's that in my tummy? And I would never have even known what it was. And then I kind of suffered infrequently from period pain thereafter. And like a lot of you, you'll know that sometimes, leading up, even for, your older athletes or your master athletes or whatever else, that they might have suffered from period pain, and then they had maybe their first child, and then, that pain decreases, or they don't have it thereafter. That a lot of the time happens as well. So period pain, is caused by basically the muscular wall is contracting, as we we're talking there. The egg isn't fertilized, so we don't need the uterine lining anymore, the womb lining anymore. It contracts and it sheds, but in the process, it compresses the blood vessels in the lining of the uterus, and that cuts off the blood supply for temporarily, and that then triggers the release of these prostaglandins and their pain chemicals. And there's a reason why I'm telling you that, is because like when we're talking in a later slide, we're talking about how Nurofen, for example, would probably work a bit better for period pain than say your Panadol. And the reason is it works very effectively on those prostaglandins, and that's the reason why it works well. So we're just getting onto that now. So how do I treat period pain? So heat packs. Now, as I was saying to the guys last night, the barrister's coming out at me now, I guess, when we're putting period packs together, I don't know if I would advise to put a heat pack in, because, somebody is not going to use that properly. And, those, obviously they're very bad for the environment as well, but those ones that you kind of break and shake or whatever else, and then you can be sure somebody's going to break it and it's going to burn somebody, or a chemical burn or something like that. So just to be very careful. But at home for your athletes, it's very, very effective. A heat pack in the microwave works very, very well. It's like anything. A hot bath with sore muscles work very well. So yeah, your warm bath or your shower. Massage works very well. I usually show that to students or athletes where they're caught out, they're away from home, they've no access to pain relief, they've no access to heat or anything. Rubbing their tummy in a circular motion. Now, it won't get rid of the pain completely, but it'll help reduce it. It's like anything. It's like massaging a sore muscle. It really, really helps, and it gets it to relax. And then moving on to your pain relief, you'll notice that I don't put that up at the very top. I kind of like try the other things first. But obviously, when pain is bad, thanks be to God for pain relief is all I'll say. So your Panadols and your Nurofen. Now, if these two aren't controlling the pain, you do need to speak to your GP, because we expect normal period pain to be controlled by your Panadols or your Nurofens. Speak to your GP, because they probably would have to prescribe something like Ponston or Corral. The only thing about the Ponston Corral is they can make your athlete a little bit drowsy, and that would be very relevant to your high performance athlete. You don't want to kind of making them tired on a start line. So it wouldn't be something you'd try the night before a very big competition or the morning of a competition. You would try that, in a cycle where you're not obviously competing, so that you can try it out and see what kind of effects that it has on you. And then the cyclopren is more, it doesn't have any really effect on your pain relief, but it lightens heavy periods. Because I have seen young girls, their periods being so heavy that they've ended up with blood transfusions, hemoglobins dropping to 7. So it can, very heavy periods can have very detrimental effects on girls, and we need to keep an eye on their hemoglobins. And obviously they can become anemic, and that's not very compatible, as you know, with sport, especially when trying to get oxygen around the body. So it can have very big effects. But the cyclopren is something that it's prescription, but it's something they can go to their GP to talk about whether they're suitable for it. And as I say, it lightens the heavy period and it might make it more manageable. And then obviously the contraceptive pill. But like I know a good few athletes that I would have, competed with and spoken to, and younger athletes in particular, and it doesn't suit everyone, and they had to come off it. So it doesn't work for everybody, and it kind of can change their mood. They can just feel differently and not feel themselves on it. And then tramadol is a very, very strong pain relief, but it was used sometimes for the use of very bad period pain, very bad cramping, but it has been banned. Obviously, it's a prohibited substance now since the 1st of January 2024. it's just there in case that anybody thought that it was okay to use it now, because it's not. And then exercise, and we always say this to athletes and to girls in general, that it's really great for period pain. And I know that they'll reply back to me and say it's the last thing I feel like is going out exercising when I have very bad period pain. But we do know it releases the happy hormones such as serotonin and your endorphins, and it's similar to going for a recovery run after a very heavy training session. So heavy periods, that's another one of I've touched on it there, but the very big challenges for our girls, for why they might drop out of sport in general, or why they, don't turn up at the training session, or they're impacted usually at the morning of a competition when they've done everything right. They've got their nutrition, they've got their hydration and their recovery, and their training has begun delightfully well. And then the morning of a competition, they get their period, and it's particularly heavy. And the challenges of that, and trying to get that 1% maybe advantage in a competition or in your race or in your high jump or whatever else, and then this happens to you. A heavy period can lead to iron deficiency. I touched on that, on anemia, and that creates problems obviously in everyday life. And I have seen girls getting, as I say, blood transfusions because of it. And then hormone therapy, we're obviously referring here to the pill, and painkillers and medication to reduce bleeding can help. And I've touched on that in the previous slide. And the total amount of blood loss is about 60 mils. That's kind of for your normal period. A heavy period then will be over 80 mils. And how would you know that? Well, a girl will be changing a pad. A real objective way is to changing a pad every hour, or every 2 hours, or changing a tampon, and maybe having to wear a tampon and a pad and their period underwear, and it's still kind of leaking through. And you can imagine, how would you feel comfortable competing, or training so it's trying to overcome those challenges for our girls, and what can we do? And they would feel weak and tired and sluggish as well with heavy periods, losing that much blood. So this, I think I said to you at the very start, I feel very, very passionate about, and I use my advocacy skills as a barrister, and then obviously my nursing skills as well. But this is something I feel very strongly about. I think that sport in general, and in particular athletics, should be for everyone. And I know it is for everybody, and we're as inclusive as possible. But there's extra challenges for our girls with intellectual and physical disabilities. And I give the example, say, for example, I would work very closely with girls with autism and with Down syndrome in particular, and girls with physical disabilities. But you can imagine, for example, having a physical disability and somebody having to bring you into a bathroom and change your pad or whatever else, and the dignity of the girl and how that's impacted. And then girls with autism, say, for example, they may have sensitivity issues. So they describe to us, examples would be that they hate the plastic in a pad. They can actually physically hear it moving when they're moving, and it feels that, the edges of it feel very uncomfortable. And then they would also have difficulty with executive functioning. So what that means is that they wouldn't be, like you or I would, know to take the pad out of the plastic covering, and we'd know to take the plastic back off it, and we'd know to put it on the right way around in our underwear. And then, how to kind of, when it was saturated or whatever else, when we need to change it, and we'd know how to, put it into sanitary bin. They wouldn't necessarily follow that kind of executive functioning, as that's what we kind of call that. So we would kit them very much out with period underwear. We'd put super absorbent period underwear on them that they can put on for their whole day in Athlone or whatever else, or their whole day, their training session, and they're able to come back, and mom and dad or whatever else are able to change later after the shower or whatever. And it's just preserving that dignity of the girl and of our girls. And the same again with Down syndrome is that, say, for example, they can be very, the girls that I work with are very fearful of blood, say, for example. So they every other time that they saw blood, they had fallen and hurt themselves, or they cut their knee or they cut their arm, and it was associated with this ouchie or this pain or whatever else. And now suddenly this is blood coming from them, and they're trying to process this. And this has to happen for 30 to 40 years of their life. So you can imagine the impact of that. So that's kind of examples where I feel very strongly that we need to be inclusive. So when we're putting our period packs together for our clubs, or we're putting something into our girls' bags as parents, that we have, our period underwear also as an option in there, along with our pads and our tampons. So periods in sports. So I was talking to the men last night, and you know, we as coaches want black and white answers. We really do. We want to look, you know, tell me now how that impacts, how a period is going to impact my athletes. Well, we know that this doesn't kind of work with women and their menstrual cycle and with periods. Everybody is very, very different. And say, for example, even me even saying, like, I would say, well, actually, I had a very moderate, I'd say, period, but that could be heavy to someone else or light to someone else. So it's very individual. So we take on the whole person as a coach. We should look at the individual. We also, like, regular periods are a very positive sign of health. So no matter what girl comes to us and tells us about a period, or what woman comes to us and asks us about the period or whatever else, we're really positive about it. This is wonderful. It's a celebration. This is great. You're very healthy. You're having a period. So being really positive about it. Period impacts females very differently, and you know better than anybody on this call that that's the case. And then it's about preparing that physical environment for periods. And we'll talk about this in a little while, of just making sure that we have our kits and that we're prepared from a physical environment. And I know it's not always easy. We might not have access to changing facilities, might not have access to toilets, etc., which is a big issue for girls, and for girls to continue on in sport. If there's nowhere for them to go to change a pad, then what are we going to do about that? How are we going to solve that? The mental and emotional environment for periods, knowing that we have prepared the environment for them to feel comfortable to be able to talk about their periods. So it's about us being comfortable and knowledgeable on the topic, first of all, and then having a plan in place. If a girl came to us having her first period, or she's got her period unexpectedly, or it's a challenge for her, it's impacting on our competition, it's impacting on our training, I'm having bad period pain, periods are very heavy, being able to have all those type of conversations. And then we have this thing called perceived performance versus objective performance. And, you know, I would say to you, if you would ask me, you'd say, well, you know, when you're competing, what would impact you? And I'd say, oh God, really hate the first 3 days of my period. I feel like I don't perform very well. And then you might come along as a coach, will say, actually, Ellie, you were 0.01 of a second quicker in that race than you were a week ago. And that's kind of the objective performance. And I'll talk about that in a second. So you're, as the females on this call, are very familiar with all the hormones that's flying around our body in any one time. And I often say how we're normal at all, I'll never know. But anyway, we've all this going on. So if you look at the blue line, that's our estrogen, and you can see it's kind of low. Don't mind that early follicular stage. That just means the first 5 days of your period. So that's the blue kind of line is low initially, and then it rises up, and then it kind of drops off again later on in our cycle. And the progesterone then is low at the initial part of our cycle, and then rises up around ovulation, where we're producing the egg, and then drops off again. Sorry, that's the FSH. The red line here is low initially, and then it rises right high at the latter part of our cycle. And they usually would say that we would see injury around, you know, that injury might be a bit more common, that research which kind of show that injury a bit more common around that, a higher progesterone in the second part of the cycle. And then the broken red line is the luteinizing hormone. Don't worry kind of about that. That's kind of important in ovulation. And then your FSH, or your follicle stimulating hormone, is here as well. And I guess when we're monitoring girls' cycles medically, we're looking at their FSH and their LH in particular. So that's just to show you kind of what's going on hormone-wise, and we won't go too much into that, but we have a lot going on in different stages of our cycle, as we know. So then going to perceived versus our objective performance. So perceived performance. So that, as I was saying to you earlier, is like, so the studies would say that girls will report, or women or females will report identifying their performance to be relatively worse during that early follicular stage. And that is simply meaning that their early stages, that 1 to day 5 of when they're actually having their period. And the late luteal phase, they'll say around day 23, 24, up to day 28. And that's the few days coming up to their period. So their perceived performance, they feel that periods are impacting them during those 2 stages more so than anywhere else in their period. But if you looked at the objective performance, which they've done studies on, they've looked at anaerobic and aerobic tests and strength tests and all of that. They don't report any clear, consistent effects on the impact of the menstrual cycle on physical performance. But there was limitation. If you look at all the studies, there's limitations on those, and there's definitely more needed, because there will be things like biases, and, you know, asking girls look back and say retrospectively 3 months ago, you know, there can be biases. They can say they feel worse or better. And that was the limitations of a lot of the studies so far. So The one sure way of finding out if you really wanted to know how a period is impacting on your athlete is getting them to track their period. And there's a million different types of apps there on your smartphones about tracking periods. So that's a good way of getting your athlete to track how they feel around their period. And then, you know, when they're talking about their perceived kind of impact of the periods, that you can kind of say, okay, track your period, tell me how you're feeling at different stages in your period. And you could be, as a coach, looking at objectively and going, well, actually you're training very well during that time, if that's really important. And I guess that would be kind of more relevant to high performance athletes in particular. So then just, this was kind of a slide more for the men last night, Danyi, because you'll know this, but the first day of your menstrual cycle is actually the first day one of your period. So this lady here is tracking her period. So you can see the first X is on the 12. So that's the first day of her menstrual period. And you count she's counted the 5 days of her period there, the 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 of the month. So if she had a 28-day cycle, you'd expect her to ovulate produce the egg around the day 14, and then you'd expect maybe her period to come about 14 days after that if it's a 28-day cycle. So if you're counting a period and she had a 28-day cycle, you'd count day one as the 12th of the month there. But you'd know how to do that anyway. And anybody that has ever wants to ask any questions about that, I've loads of ways of contacting me at the end of this anyway. So I'm not going to go too much into the whole nutrition part. You're experts on this at this stage. What's important for period health? Well, obviously, really good nutrition, the same nutrition that's important for athletes in general. There's really no difference there. Lots of fresh air, which they're going to get anyway. Lots of exercise, which they're going to get anyway. And keeping communications open is important for period health in general. So getting to kind of, I suppose, the crux of this, or why we're actually here tonight, and maybe opening the discussion a little bit about how we start making that physical and emotional environment comfortable for girls to be able to talk about periods, us being able to talk to them as coaches, and then being able to come to us. So the big part of this is normalize the conversation, be comfortable on the topic yourself, be comfortable about, you know, if you're asked, you know, some of the I guess the earlier slides, some of that information is very, very important to be able to have, you know, in your box of tools as such when you're talking about it. Use very matter-of-fact language. Discuss periods as a normal part of an athlete's health. Don't be any different about it to any other physical aspect that you're speaking about. Use direct terms like period or menstruation. You see me using menarche and menses. You don't have to go into that level of detail, but period or whatever. I'll stick to those kind of common direct terms. Mention it regularly. Don't have it as something that you only bring up in private or in emergencies. And we were just saying last night that a great way of starting it is like, you know, if you're finding it kind of difficult to kind of broach the subject, or you know, as I say, you have the giggly gerties, you know, they're laughing and they're giggling or whatever else when you mention it or whatever else, which is kind of common when they're younger, they kind of nudging each other or whatever. But just even saying, look, we have period packs. We'll have that, you know, this is what it looks like. We'll have it at Loan, we'll have it in Tullamore or whatever. We have it here in the club. This is where it's hanging if you need it. And even, you know, send an email to the parents. I know one club was very proactive about that, and they sent out an email to the parents for them to talk to their daughters, letting them know that there was period pack at training, and that they could access and take whatever they want out of it. And that was wonderful, wonderful to see. So faster open communication, and you know all this anyway, they can come to you about anything, and you don't know what an athlete is going to come and disclose to you at any point in time. So just being open about everything, and that they're comfortable to come to you about anything. Keeping your facial expression neutral. You know, not a face of, you know, horror or going, oh my God, what am I going to do? Or, oh God, you know, or a face of panic. Just keeping very kind of neutral expression. This is no different to them telling you about anything. Reassurance that periods are normal and really healthy. So if they got their first period with you, or, you know, while you're away somewhere or there's a training session, just kind of reassure them, oh, that's great, that's very, you know, normal, healthy. Be very positive about it. Don't let it be the first period that they get that you're in a panic mode, or you're like, oh my God, or you're going, what am I going to do, or where am I going to get a pad for this child, or whatever. Ensure privacy and discretion. It's important to normalize. It's always very important to normalize the topic, but allow athletes to speak to you in private. Not everybody wants to declare that they're having the period. Not everyone feels comfortable about talking about it. You get athletes that'll be very comfortable about it, but then there'll be some that just don't want to talk about it, and you have to go and respect, you know, that age group. It's kind of very relevant to their state of development as well. Some are ready to talk about it and some just aren't, and that's okay. Offer factual information. It's important where teens get their information from. And I guess that was the reason for the earlier slides as well, is making sure that whatever information these young girls get, that it's proper information. It's not got off the internet. God knows what they'll read there. So it's, you know, getting from you as a responsible athlete, as a coach that they trust, getting that proper information is very, very important. And letting them know that, you know, periods can impact their energy and their hydration when they're in recovery mode after a training session. And it can affect the performance for some, and whether that's perceived or objective. Share personal stories. We're very good, as because a lot of us are females here, so you know, it's not all, you know, it's not that you go launching into your own period or your own period stories or whatever else. But sometimes when you know, I sometimes open a conversation by going, you know, when I was whatever age and I got my period, I might introduce something like that. Sharing personal stories or experience a good way to start the conversation on periods. Acknowledge period related symptoms. Understand that symptoms like cramps and fatigue, heavy periods, bloating can affect their perceived or their objective performance. And even though you might be saying it's not affecting you at all, you know, you're running great, you did brilliantly, it doesn't matter. If your athlete is perceiving that it's having an impact on them, that's what really matters there. And we never downplay it or ignore an athlete's complaints and say, geez, you'll be grand, go on and do your session, you'll be fine. Modify the athlete's session if needed, like reducing the intensity. And we know this, like we change plans all the time. Don't be a slave to the plan. And sometimes it's just easier to talk to a female coach, and that's easier. And that was for the men last night. Like sometimes girls will just feel more comfortable talking to their female coach about it, and that's absolutely fine. So the practical support. So how do we make that physical environment, as we were talking about earlier? So having menstrual packs or period packs that are inclusive of everyone. And that shows that you are prepared and you're supportive. If you have your period pack at training and you have your period pack up at the competitions, those girls have trust and belief and comfort, knowing that no matter what happens, no matter, even if you know, like even having the packs there for a female coach that might get caught out without a period pad, it's, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but it's an awful feeling to be away somewhere and you're going into a bathroom trying to roll all the tissue together or whatever else to try and deal with the period. Like there's no dignity in that. So it's all about being prepared. Discuss hydration, nutrition, and recovery within the context of periods. Great way to normalize periods. Just make it like everything else. It's just like everything else. Recognize different experiences. Park the research. There's nothing better than that athlete that's in front of you. So avoid making general assumptions. Some girls will be very impacted by their period, as we're talking about period pain and heavy periods. They'll be very impacted. Some won't. Some will some months and some and not others. So see the whole athlete. Involve the parents if the athlete's okay with that. And of course, that's very age dependent. Obviously, if you have a younger athlete, you involve the parents. And if they're an older athlete, then you don't necessarily need to. And then just we were looking at kind of at the management of periods and just looking at that kind of age profile of the younger girls that you might be coaching. And, you know, what was interesting was I was giving this talk to TY students, and they were just like, when we got more comfortable on the topic and we were chatting away, they were kind of saying that they weren't wearing tampons. And I was quite surprised with this generation that they, you know, I expected, like for us, you know, maybe in our generation, maybe not as much, but I thought that they would be, and they weren't. They just didn't want to wear them. Now, that's not everyone, but they didn't want to wear them. So just not assuming that a tampon is good. Like obviously young girls, it's not suitable for, it's not that you can't wear a tampon at any stage. It's just that they're kind of fiddly and, you know, the hymen might be still in place and very uncomfortable to put a tampon in or whatever else. It might be too young for them. But a lot of older girls don't wear them either. So just being aware that, you know, periods aren't like a straightforward. And when you're not wearing a tampon, then you're down to a pad. And then if you know, you might have to use or recommend period underwear, say, for example, in those cases. A lot kind of describe pads crunching up. We've all had that experience, and the leak from the side. Periods being heavy, we've spoken about that. No changing facilities is a huge challenge. No time to change a pad or tampon, you know, maybe in between a race or in a cross-country race where you're away in some field somewhere and you can't go all the way up to try and change a pad or tampon that needs to be changed. You can imagine, you know, all these worries yourself that you'd even have in your own daily life, and then worried about leaking. So then period product choices. So, you know, we're like, we're in the year 2000 or whatever it is, 24. We, you know, there isn't an awful lot of still advancements. I like to think that I've contributed to bring in more options, because we were the very first to do period underwear in Ireland. So I hope that I've played a part in making a few more choices anyway. But period underwear are absorbent and they're leak proof. They don't have to wear any of the period product with them. They can wear a pad, they can wear a tampon with them. They're very useful in heavy period, those heavy periods we're talking about, where they're saturating through a pad or tampon and they're away somewhere or they're in a competition. Period underwear is the super absorbent that we do. You cannot get them in shops, but we do super absorbent period underwear that can take up to 8 to 10 tampons worth of blood. And they're brilliant that if they're doing cross country or whatever else and they're worried about leaks. And they're reusable and they're environmentally friendly option, because you just can wash them again and use them over and over again. That's what they're there for. Then you have your period pads, and just making sure that you have different absorbencies as well, because not one period is the same as we're talking about there. So just if you're putting period packs together, to make sure that you have different absorbencies. And then tampons, that, as we were talking earlier, it's not really, suitable maybe for our young teens. And they find them very hard to manage. And like things like young girls tend to forget, if they do use a tampon, they tend to forget to take the other one out, or they tend to forget it on their on their last day. They tend to forget sometimes to take the tampon out, and then you have issues like with infections and all of that, and we don't want that to happen to our young girls with fertility issues down the line. So we want to be very, very careful about what we recommend as well. And then obviously toxic shock syndrome, I've never seen it, but it is one of the things that you associate if a tampon was left in for a long period of time, or for longer than it should. And then menstrual cups, I've never used them myself, but I know that maybe girls more, or women more in their 20s would start to use them. They're a very environmental friendly option, but they would be very kind of fiddly for a younger girl to use. And then this is just to anybody that hasn't seen them already. This is what period underwear looks like. We do them in lots of different colors, because obviously our young teens don't want anyone to know that they have period underwear or anything. They don't want pads, tampons, don't want anyone to know anything about anything. So they come in different colors that just look like normal underwear. No one knows any different. The pad on the inside is black. It's built into the underwear, so there's no staining or anything like that. And they're just washed and used again. And down there on the left-hand side is period sports shorts. I designed them myself. They were based a bit on the Nike Pros. They're nice and short, especially for the younger girls, because they don't like any longer shorts down their legs, as you know. And then over on the right hand side would be kind of underwear that I designed so that it would hide, you can move that kind of side strap up and down, especially for under shorts. So then going to period kits, and for you being prepared for the physical environment. I know a lot of you would probably have period kits already, but just for those that mightn't, and just think about what you need to put into them. So we do period kits that already have everything in them. We have them on our website, but you can absolutely build a kit together. And this is what kind of goes into it. So you have your period underwear, so you make sure you're inclusive for the girls with heavy periods, hard to manage periods, the girls with physical and intellectual disabilities, for example, where traditional products are just not suitable. Then you have your periods pads, have different absorbencies. Tampons the same, have different absorbencies, have hand sanitizer. The compressed towels, we have them in our pack. They're like, you can add water, they're like tiny, and then you add water to them and they can wash just even bottled water to them, and they can wash their hands or clean off any blood staining that they might have. And then wipes, compostable bags. We've the eco-friendly compostable bags within the pack, and how you would use those is, say, for example, they have a blood-stained shorts or underwear, or they're somewhere in cross country and there's no sanitary bin to put a pad or a tampon or whatever else to dispose of it. Well, you can put it into these compostable bags. And then the outer bag needs to be a hygiene bag, not just any bag, because you obviously have sanitary pads and something that you're putting on, obviously on the body. So you want to make sure that they're clean and hygiene, that these bags are easy to wipe down, that they're transportable, they're easy to take away with you on a way trip, they're discreet. No girl was going to go over to a bag that's clearly a period bag that the boys are all going to know is a period bag. So they need to be discreet, no period logos, and that they're waterproof, obviously, because you're going to be outside with them, and it's going to be a very soggy mess inside the bag if they're not waterproof. Usually, and then just we have different, in our bags, we have the different levels of absorbency of the period underwear, the period underwear as well. We have super absorbent in there, and we have moderate absorbency, because no two girls is the same. And then we also, this slide is kind of more about encouraging parents to be proactive in relation to their girls' sports bags of having an emergency period kit. And they can be very simple. They can be a makeup bag, and they can put pads, tampons, wipes, hand sanitizer, whatever into them. We do individual kits as well for sports bags, but they're easy to make as well for themselves. The only difference with ours is that we'll have everything in them, like period underwear will be included in them as well. But they're very handy for their emergency kits, so they can refill them as they need, but they're ready in their bags. And as I say, we feel a lot of responsibility, obviously, as coaches and as clubs, but we also have to put responsibility back on parents to have their girls prepared when they're coming away to a competition. And it's not that difficult to have, as I say, those little packs in their bags, in their sports bags already. And then the key takeaway messages is be as comfortable and confident on the topic of periods as you can. Inform yourself, you're all females, so you all have had periods and you're familiar with them, but just being comfortable about how, maybe even a role play of how you would speak to a girl if she came to you with her period or a period query, and making sure that you're comfortable on the topic, making sure that physical environment is ready, be prepared with your emergency period kits, as we just spoke about there. And then the emotional environment, being normal about periods, normalizing them, being comfortable, making sure that, your athlete is comfortable and safe, and, be open about them. They can come to you about anything. It's no big deal. That's where we want to get to with periods, that it's so comfortable, that it's no big taboo. We want to remove all those taboos. It's going to take years to do that, but this is a great place to start. Neutral facial expression, and be in control of the situation, because that little girl can have her first period with you. And we do know that the first period, how a girl perceives her first period, has a huge impact on how she perceives her period going forward. And we don't want a situation where her first period comes while she's at a training session, and her first experience is she's bleeding into her clothes and she's nobody to tell, and she comes home and that's the first memory of her period. We want to try and move away from that. And that's why we need to make sure that the physical environment is right and the emotional environment is right. And then this is all the different ways that you can contact me. I'm very open to taking any questions at any stage. Some questions you mightn't be comfortable about asking maybe on this, but you can always come to me. You can find the easiest way to follow us is on Nikki's one on Instagram. I'm always kind of talking about periods there, and there's like different options and solutions there as well. I don't go around recommending just period underwear or period sport shorts or anything like that. I'm very open. I'm all about the girl and the woman, about whatever is comfortable for them, but just opening up options for them and finding solutions. Because we talk about all the challenges that we have with periods and the dropout from sport and puberty and all those different things. But we need to kind of have somebody that's looking at solutions, and that's where I see myself, and that's my job. So now open to any questions. So I'll stop sharing the screen. Over to you, Anna.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ellie. That's the second time I've heard that presentation, and there was definitely some really, really good stuff in there. So hopefully everybody on the call has got something out of that, particularly around the practical tips. I think that's really kind of so important when it comes to kind of coaching. There's a couple of questions come in, so I'll just run through them. One question is around what age is a good age to start this conversation with the squads that you're coaching, or with any girls that you're coaching? What age would you recommend the coaches start to have this conversation?
Okay, so if you look at schools, they have the talk around fourth class. So girls can start getting a period. We know they can get period as young as 8, but we kind of expect it in around between, obviously they can get it at 10 and the average being 12. But I would start having that conversation, or even opening that conversation, or opening up about the period pack that you have, if you want to open it that way, for 10-year-old girls onwards. Okay. But being aware that it can happen before 10,
Okay, perfect. And then the second question is around what's normal and what's not normal. So we always kind of say that very, very heavy periods are described as not normal. If it's a very light period, would that be a similar red flag, or is that just dependent on the girl?
Yeah, it can be depend on the girl, but I would certainly, anything that like that, a very light, scanty period, I certainly would. It'd be no harm to have a hormone profile check in the GPs. They would look at those 2 hormones I talked about, the FSH and LH and everything like that, just to make sure that everything is all right. It's no harm. It's just a quick chat with a GP just to make sure, and reassurance that everything is all right. Yeah, but scanty periods probably would have a GP review that.
Okay, perfect. And then I know you kind of went through what goes in a period pack. So if clubs are interested in that, I suppose one final thing. So what can clubs do now? So if clubs aren't doing anything in this space, what is the one thing that they could take away from this and say, right, okay, I'm going to do this, and that'll start helping girls in my club, supporting girls in my club about being period supportive? What one thing could they do as an action from tonight?
Well, I obviously, I think the practical support is very, very important, because obviously speaking about it and opening up the conversation is all very important, but we need to be prepared for periods, making sure that all clubs are prepared for a period, that if it comes, even for their own coaches themselves, anyone being caught out, as I was saying there, the dignity around periods as well, and not having a girl, her first experience of having a period was leaking through her clothes or bleeding into her clothes. So being prepared with the physical environment of having period kits, I think, is very, very important. It's an easy one to solve,
Yeah, no, perfect. And I think probably some clubs on this call probably do that already.
Yeah.
And it's just making those first steps if you don't. And then if you do already, that's great. And just making sure you know how to have that conversation from my point. So that's great. So there's no more questions come in. So just to finish off by saying thank you so much to Ellie for giving up her time to do that. And I'll be sending around the recording and also links through to Ellie's website if clubs want to look at that as well, in terms of that period underwear or in terms of those period packs to have a look at. And we'll try and get the slides through to you as well, so you can have a look through again. But thank you all for coming on this evening. I do appreciate it's a Friday evening, so I hope you got something great from it. And as I said, thank you very much, and I'll be in touch with everybody after the call. All right, thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.